The first shots were fired at 600 hours, Terran Standard Time. Across the vastness of space, 100 different species watched in stunned silence as humanity's response to a century of oppression finally arrived. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the TSS Retribution, her weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. 30 years of service had carved lines into her features, but her eyes remained sharp, alert. This was the moment the United Earth Fleet had prepared for since first contact with the Galactic Consortium had gone catastrophically wrong. Targeting systems locked on the Vexstar command vessel, announced Lieutenant Rivera from his station. His fingers danced across the holographic interface with practiced precision. "Ready to fire on your command, Admiral." Chen didn't immediately respond. Her gaze lingered on the main view screen, where the imposing silhouette of the alien flagship hung against the backdrop of stars. The Vexstar, with their 6 limbs and chitin-covered bodies, had been the first to attack human colonies. They'd been the first to dismiss humanity as primitive mammals unworthy of galactic citizenship, and they'd been the loudest voices in the consortium calling for Earth's quarantine. "Admiral," Rivera prompted. Chen nodded slowly. "Fire." The Retribution shuddered as its main cannon discharged a stream of superheated plasma. The bridge crew watched in silence as the deadly projectile crossed the void between the ships. When it struck the Vexstar vessel, the resulting explosion briefly outshone the nearest star. "Direct hit," reported Commander Taylor from Tactical. "Their shields are down to 30%. "Again," Chen ordered. Across the galaxy, representatives from 100 alien governments gathered around their communication terminals. None had anticipated this. For centuries, the Galactic Consortium had maintained order through technological superiority. New species were gradually introduced to galactic society, guided, and, when necessary, controlled by the established powers. Humanity had been different from the start. In the Grand Council chamber of Nexus Station, Supreme Arbiter Zolak of the Uln Collective stared at the transmission in horror. The human vessel, a sleek, predatory shape of gleaming metal, was systematically dismantling one of the most powerful warships in the Consortium fleet. "This cannot be happening," whispered Delegate Krill, his translucent tentacles writhing in agitation. The humans were contained. Their technology was primitive. "Apparently not as primitive as we believed," replied Zolak. The Arbiter's compound eyes reflected the images of destruction unfolding before them. "They've been building in secret." On the other side of the chamber, Ambassador Divero of the Tellarate Federation leaned forward, 6-fingered hands steepled beneath his elongated chin. Unlike the others, he did not seem surprised. "I warned the consortium 50 cycles ago," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "When we discovered their historical archives, I advised caution. These humans, their entire history is warfare. They advance most rapidly under threat, and we have been threatening them since first contact." The Retribution fired again, and again. Each blast tore through the weakening shields of the Vexstar vessel. Admiral Chen's expression remained impassive, but inside, a storm of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She thought of her grandfather, who had died in the First Contact War. She thought of her mother, who had helped design the revolutionary propulsion system that now powered the Retribution. She thought of Earth, beautiful and blue, surrounded by orbital defenses that had failed to prevent the consortium's disciplinary action 15 years ago. 3 million dead in a single day, when the Vexstar had demonstrated their power by striking major coastal cities. "Their engines are disabled," announced Taylor. "They're dead in space." Chen nodded. "Open a channel." The view screen flickered, and suddenly the bridge crew found themselves staring at the alien commander. High General Vex Kral looked much as Chen remembered from propaganda broadcasts. Chitinous plates covering a vaguely insectoid form, compound eyes glittering with contempt. "Human," the alien said, its translator rendering the clicks and hisses into English. "You have committed an act of war against the Galactic Consortium. Surrender your vessel immediately." Chen allowed herself a small smile. "High General, I believe you misunderstand the situation. This isn't an act of war. This is an act of revolution. Back in the council chamber, the transmission continued. The gathered representatives watched as a human, so small, so fragile-looking compared to most spacefaring species, delivered what amounted to a declaration of independence. For 100 years, Admiral Chen was saying, humanity has endured the consortium's guidance. We've watched our colonies stripped of resources. We've been denied access to galactic markets. We've buried millions of our dead after your necessary corrections. Today that ends. Divero nodded slowly. You all laughed when I suggested studying human psychology more carefully. Their concept of freedom is fundamental to their identity. Did you really believe they would accept permanent subservience? Zolak's exoskeleton clicked nervously. One ship cannot stand against the consortium fleet. One ship. Devero's lipless mouth formed what might have been a smile. Look more closely at your sensors. On the Retribution, Lieutenant Rivera's console beeped. Admiral, the Constellation is reporting all ships in position. Fleet Admiral Thomas awaits your command. Chen's eyes never left the face of the Vexstar commander as she said, Tell Thomas to proceed, and inform High General Vexcrawl that he has 5 minutes to evacuate his crew before we destroy his vessel. The alien's mandibles clattered in what humans had learned was an expression of disbelief. You cannot destroy a consortium flagship. The response will be, Look beyond your ship, General. Chen interrupted. Humanity is done hiding. The view screen split to show a wider view of space. Around the disabled Vexstar vessel, pinpoints of light were emerging from hyperspace. Dozens, then hundreds of them. Human ships of all sizes, from nimble frigates to massive destroyers, taking formation. In the council chamber, pandemonium erupted. Delegates shouted over one another, demanding explanations, calling for immediate military response. Only Divero remained calm, watching the human fleet with what appeared to be respect. Where did they get such technology? Demanded Zolak. How did we not know? Divero sighed. Because we chose not to know. Because it was easier to dismiss them as primitives than to recognize a genuine threat. We treated them as children while they studied us like scientists. We showed them our technology while refusing to trade fairly for theirs. And all the while, they were learning, adapting, preparing. On the view screen, Admiral Chen was speaking again, her voice carrying across thousands of light years to the gathered representatives of 100 worlds. Today marks a new chapter in galactic history. Humanity will no longer accept second-class status. We demand recognition as equals. We demand fair trade. We demand reparations for a century of exploitation. And to ensure these demands are taken seriously. She paused, and in that moment of silence, the fate of the galaxy hung in balance. We have positioned antimatter warheads on 70 major consortium worlds. They will remain inactive as long as negotiations proceed in good faith. This is not a threat. It is a guarantee that our voice will finally be heard. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Divero was the first to speak, his words falling like stones into still water. I believe, my colleagues, that humanity has just taken a seat at the table. The question now is, what game are we playing? Silence lingered in the council chamber for what felt like an eternity. The image of the human fleet, hundreds of warships where there should have been none, burned in the minds of every delegate present. Zolak was the first to recover, mandibles clicking furiously as he addressed the chamber. We must convene the Defense Council immediately. These humans have committed an act-off. Of what exactly? Interrupted Divero, rising from his seat. Of defending themselves after a century of exploitation. Of developing technology we deliberately withheld from them. Perhaps we should consider what brought us to this point before we rush toward further conflict. The Arbiter's compound eyes narrowed. You sound dangerously close to sympathizing with terrorists, Ambassador. Divero's expression hardened. I sympathize with the overlooked. I warned this council that humans were unique among the species we encountered. Their adaptability, their drive. It's unprecedented. While we were monitoring their official shipyards, they were building in abandoned asteroid belts and the dark sides of moons. While we were restricting their access to quantum computing, they were developing their own approaches to artificial intelligence. We didn't respect them. And now we're paying the price. Across the chamber, a previously silent delegate rose. Ambassador Thrax of the Medusan hegemony seldom spoke at council meetings, but when they did, even Zolak listened. "What troubles me?" Thrax said, their crystalline voice resonating through the chamber, "is not just the ships or the weapons. It's the antimatter warheads. If the humans speak truly, they've managed to place weapons on 70 worlds without detection. Our security protocols have failed completely." Back on the Retribution, Admiral Chen watched as escape pods jettisoned from the crippled Vexstar vessel. Each small craft represented lives she had chosen to spare, a decision that hadn't come easily after 15 years of nursing her hatred for the aliens who had bombed Earth's cities. "All Vexstar escape pods accounted for," reported Commander Taylor. "They're clear of the blast radius." Chen nodded. "Proceed with destruction of the flagship." The bridge crew worked in focused silence, each aware of the historical significance of this moment. Humanity had endured a century of being treated as galactic children, primitive, naive creatures to be guided and controlled. Today, they were demonstrating just how much they had grown in the shadows of oppression. "Admiral," Lieutenant Rivera called out, "incoming transmission from Fleet Admiral Thomas." Chen straightened her uniform jacket. On screen, the weathered face of Fleet Admiral Thomas appeared before them. Unlike Chen, Thomas had been born in space, on one of the first colony ships sent to Alpha Centauri. He had never known Earth except through stories and historical archives. Perhaps that was why he had been the first to advocate for a more aggressive stance against the consortium. "Admiral Chen," he greeted, a rare smile crossing his typically stern features. "The Perseus fleet is in position. All 23 target stations have been surrounded. Any resistance?" "Minimal. They were caught completely off guard. Most surrendered the moment our ships appeared." Thomas's smile faded. "We lost 2 frigates near Proxima Station. The Kel Sharon defense grid was more robust than our intelligence suggested." Chen closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment to feel the weight of those losses. "Send the names of the fallen to my private terminal. I'll draft messages to their families personally." "Yes, Admiral." Thomas hesitated. "The consortium is scrambling. Their communication channels are in chaos. Some are calling for immediate retaliation. Others are advocating compliance with our demands. We've intercepted transmissions suggesting the Vexstar military caste is preparing to launch strikes against Earth colonies." "Let them try," Chen replied, her voice cold. "The planetary defense systems are fully operational now. They'll find our colonies aren't the soft targets they once were." In the dim light of his private quarters aboard Nexus Station, Ambassador Di Vero reviewed classified files that few in the consortium had access to. Reports from undercover operatives who had lived among humans, cultural analyses that had been ignored by the Galactic Security Council, warnings that had gone unheeded. One report in particular held his attention, a detailed study of human warfare throughout their history. Unlike most spacefaring species, humans had never unified under a single government before achieving interstellar travel. Their planet had been divided, fractious, with hundreds of nations in constant competition. This had bred a unique approach to conflict, adaptable, innovative, and deeply resilient. The door chimed, interrupting his thoughts. "Enter," he called out. Thrax of the Medusan hegemony glided into the room, their crystalline body catching the starlight from the viewport. "Ambassador Di Vero, I hoped we might speak privately." Di Vero gestured to a chair designed to accommodate Medusan physiology. "Of course, I suspect we share concerns about the Council's likely response to this situation." "Indeed." Thrax settled into the seat, their faceted eyes unreadable. "The Defense Council is already preparing a retaliatory strike. They believe a show of overwhelming force will bring the humans back into line." "Fools," Devero muttered. Did they learn nothing from the display we just witnessed? Fear rarely breeds wisdom, Thrax observed. But there is something else troubling me. Something about the human admiral's words. Devero leaned forward. Go on. She spoke of a century of exploitation, but official first contact with Earth was only 73 years ago. A heavy silence fell between them as the implication hung in the air. You believe the consortium had prior contact with Earth? Unofficial contact, Devero finally asked. Thrax's crystalline form shifted slightly, their equivalent of a nod. My people keep extensive historical records. There are inconsistencies in the official first contact narrative. Ships that went missing near Earth's solar system decades before official contact. Strange transmissions intercepted but never explained. If what you're suggesting is true, then the humans have even more reason to distrust us than we realized. Thrax finished. Back on Earth, in the underground command center beneath the ruins of what had once been San Francisco, Defense Secretary Patel studied the incoming reports with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. The initial phase of Operation Daybreak had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections. The element of surprise had been complete. But surprise was a one-time advantage. Now came the dangerous part. Madam Secretary, her aide called out, the President is ready for you. Patel nodded and made her way to the secure conference room. Inside, President Walker stood before a wall of screens displaying real-time updates from across the galaxy. Though only 50, Walker's hair had gone completely white during the crisis of '63, when the Vexstar bombardment had nearly triggered a nuclear exchange between Earth's remaining superpowers. 17 minutes, Walker said without turning. That's how long it took us to disable a Vexstar flagship that we've been told for decades was untouchable by our primitive weapons. She finally faced Patel, her expression grim. Was it worth the risk? Patel met her gaze steadily. We'll know soon enough. The Retribution has just destroyed the flagship. Admiral Chen reports all consortium communication channels have erupted in chaos. Some factions are already calling for negotiations. And the others are calling for our extinction. Patel didn't sugarcoat it, but that was always their position. At least now they'll have to work for it. Walker turned back to the screens. Have we received any official response from the Consortium Council? Not yet, but our intelligence suggests they've convened an emergency session. The Vexstar representatives are pushing for immediate military action. And our allies? Patel allowed herself a small smile. Ambassador Devero of the Tellarites has publicly called for diplomatic engagement. The Medusans are backing him. Several smaller species that have suffered similar treatment to ours are making noise about forming a coalition outside of consortium control. Walker nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on a screen showing the Retribution surrounded by its battle group. Everything hinges on what happens in the next 24 hours. If the consortium launches a full-scale attack, then humanity will finally get to test just how well we've prepared. Patel finished for her. And God help us all. The ultimatum countdown reached 18 hours when the first consortium battle group emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 7 dreadnoughts, each nearly 3 times the size of humanity's largest vessel, accompanied by dozens of support craft. They maintained position just beyond Mars' orbit, a silent threat visible to every telescope on Earth. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display aboard the Retribution as red markers appeared, representing the consortium forces. Her ship, along with 30% of the human fleet, had returned to Earth's defense perimeter, while the remainder continued operations across consortium space. They're staying outside our defense grid range, Commander Taylor noted. No signs of weapons powering up or fighter deployment. Chen's expression remained impassive, but inwardly she felt the weight of billions of lives hanging in the balance. They're making a statement, reminding us of their superior numbers. Admiral, Lieutenant Rivera called out. Incoming transmission from the lead consortium vessel. It's Grand Marshal Azov. A ripple of tension passed through the bridge crew. Grand Marshal Azov was the supreme military commander of the consortium forces, an ancient Kelsharan warrior with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. If the consortium had sent Azov himself, this was no longer a border skirmish. This was full-scale war. "Put him through," Chen ordered, squaring her shoulders. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a massive figure encased in ornate battle armor. Azov's species had evolved on a heavy gravity world. His broad, armored form reflected that heritage. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, studied Chen with cold calculation. "Admiral Chen," the Grand Marshal's deep voice rumbled through the translator. "I expected to find ruins when I arrived. It seems the Vexdar overestimated their importance to this conflict." Chen kept her expression neutral. "The Vexdar's arrogance has been their downfall for decades. I'm surprised the consortium continues to let them speak for your military interests." Indeed, something almost like approval flickered in Azov's eyes. Their flagship's destruction was instructive, as were your antimatter deployments. The Consortium Security Council has authorized me to open negotiations. Behind Chen, she heard Taylor's barely suppressed gasp of surprise. Negotiations, not surrender demands. It was more than they had dared hope for. "I'm listening," Chen replied carefully. "We will establish a neutral zone for talks. 2 representatives from each side. No weapons, no guards. I will personally represent the consortium military interests." Chen nodded slowly. "And the location?" "The abandoned listening post on Europa. 12 hours from now." When the transmission ended, the bridge erupted in nervous chatter. Commander Taylor approached Chen's chair, keeping his voice low. "Admiral, this could be a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Chen replied, rising from her seat. "The question is what kind. Prepare my shuttle, and get me a secure channel to Earth. I need to speak with President Walker immediately." In the Emergency Command Center beneath San Francisco, President Walker received Chen's report with cautious optimism. Defense Secretary Patel was less convinced. "It makes no strategic sense," Patel argued. "Why would Azov offer negotiations now, when their reinforcements are still en route? Our intelligence indicates at least 3 more battle groups will arrive within 48 hours. Walker studied the holographic display showing fleet positions throughout the Sol system. "Perhaps they're buying time. Or perhaps Azov knows something we don't." She turned to her chief science advisor. "Dr. Reeves, what's your assessment of the Europa listening post? Can we secure it in time?" Dr. Reeves, a slight woman with prematurely gray hair, consulted her tablet. "The post was abandoned 15 years ago after the bombardment. It's structurally sound, but we'd need to restart the environmental systems. The radiation levels on Europa's surface would make extended exposure dangerous without proper shielding." "Perfect for a short meeting, where neither side wants to linger," Walker noted, "and neutral enough that neither side has a significant advantage." She straightened her jacket. "I'm going." Patel's objection was immediate. "Madam President, with all due respect, you cannot personally." "I'm going," Walker repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Admiral Chen risked everything to get us to this point. I won't send someone else in my place." Her eyes softened slightly. "Besides, Azov will expect a military representative, not a head of state. My presence will throw him off balance." 12 light-years away in the private chambers of the Consortium High Council, Ambassador de Vero faced accusation from his peers. "You knew," spat Councillor Vextrol, brother to the commander of the now-destroyed flagship. "You knew what the humans were planning, and you said nothing." De Vero remained calm in the face of the Vexdar's rage. "I knew they were developing beyond our expectations, yes. I filed 17 reports over the past decade warning that our containment strategy was failing. Each one was dismissed by this council." Arbiter Zolak's compound eyes flashed with anger. "Warnings are not the same as intelligence about an imminent attack." And yet, came the crystalline voice of Ambassador Thrax from the doorway. When De Vero requested increased monitoring of human activity in their outer system, his proposal was vetoed. "By you, Arbiter." The chamber fell silent as Thrax glided forward. Behind them stood three representatives from species that, like humanity, had been kept at the fringes of consortium society: the avian Kalians, the amphibious Nor, and the silicon-based lithids. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" demanded Zolak. Thrax's crystalline surface caught the light, casting prismatic reflections across the chamber walls. "We come with new intelligence. Intelligence that changes everything we thought we knew about humanity's capabilities." "Speak plainly," ordered Counselor Vextral. "The antimatter warheads," said the Kalian representative, her feathered crest rising in agitation. "They aren't on 70 worlds as claimed." "A bluff." Zolak sounded relieved. "No," replied Thrax. "Our deep scans indicate they are on 114 worlds, including this one." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Devero's quiet voice. "And now perhaps you understand why Grand Marshal Ezov has chosen to negotiate rather than attack. If even one of those warheads detonates, the chain reaction through hyperspace could devastate half the consortium." On the frozen surface of Europa, Earth's moon, a small team of engineers worked frantically to restore life support to the abandoned listening post. Wind howled across the icy landscape, carrying particles of radiation that made their protective suits crackle with static electricity. "Environmental controls online," reported Chief Engineer Patel. No relation to the Defense Secretary, though she'd heard the joke 1,000 times. "Gravity normalized to Earth standard. Atmosphere is stable but thin. I wouldn't recommend taking deep breaths." Lieutenant Commander Santiago, head of the security detail, nodded. "How long until the President arrives?" 90 minutes, and Azov's shuttle is expected 30 minutes after that." Santiago studied the structure before them. A dome half buried in Europa's icy crust, its metal surface discolored from years of radiation exposure. "I still don't like it. Too many blind spots, too many ways this could go wrong." Engineer Patel shrugged. "That's politics for you. Always putting important people in dangerous places to talk about how to stop putting people in dangerous places." As Santiago conducted another sweep of the facility's interior, his team carefully checking every corner for surveillance devices or hidden weapons, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending disaster. Something about this hastily arranged meeting felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Chen prepared for her role in the upcoming negotiations. She had changed from her standard uniform into a more formal dress uniform, complete with the medals she'd earned during her 30 years of service. As she fastened the last button, she caught sight of her reflection in the viewport glass. Her father had been a farmer in the Midwest before the Vexstar bombardment had rendered the soil toxic for a generation. He'd told her once that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or numbers, but stubbornness. The unwillingness to accept defeat, even when all logic said surrender was the only option. "Admiral," came Rivera's voice over the intercom. "The President's shuttle has departed Earth, and we're detecting unusual energy signatures from the consortium fleet." Chen frowned. "What kind of signatures?" "Unknown, Ma'am. They're not weapons, not drives. Nothing we've encountered before." A cold feeling settled in Chen's stomach. "Maintain alert status, and get me a direct line to the President's shuttle." As President Walker's craft approached Europa, she reviewed the negotiation parameters one final time. The stakes couldn't be higher. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy hung in the balance. Either they would emerge from this conflict as equals, or they would face annihilation. "Madam President," her communications officer called out. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Chen. She says it's urgent." Walker accepted the call, noting the tension in Chen's expression immediately. "Admiral, what's happened?" "The consortium fleet is emitting unknown energy signatures, and we've lost contact with 3 of our scout ships near Saturn." Walker felt her chest tighten. "Could it be a preemptive strike?" "I don't think so. If they wanted to attack, they would have launched fighters or charged weapons. This is something else." Chen leaned closer to the camera. "Madam President, I recommend you delay landing until we can." The transmission abruptly cut off, replaced by static. Walker turned to her pilot. "What happened?" "Some kind of interference, ma'am. It's affecting all frequencies." The pilot's hands moved across the controls, his expression growing more concerned. "Navigation is degrading too. The guidance system is showing errors." Through the viewport, Walker could see Europa's icy surface growing closer. The listening post was visible now, a dark dome against the white landscape. And above it, descending from the opposite direction, was a consortium shuttle, its angular form unmistakable. "Can we abort the landing?" Walker asked, keeping her voice calm despite the growing sense of dread. The pilot's face was grim. "Not safely, ma'am. Not with these navigation errors. We're committed now." As both vessels descended toward the meeting place, neither aware of the true nature of what awaited them on the surface, Grand Marshal Azoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the energy patterns spread across the Sol system. "It is done," his second-in-command stated. "The resonance field is fully deployed. Their quantum communications will be useless." Azoth nodded slowly, his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Signal the second phase. All ships prepare to jump on my command." "And the human leaders, on Europa." Azoth turned away from the display, his expression unreadable. "That is no longer our concern." The Vexdar insisted on handling that particular arrangement. As President Walker's shuttle executed its final approach to Europa's surface, the craft shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, bathing the cabin in an ominous red glow. "What was that?" Walker demanded, gripping her seat as the shuttle lurched again. The pilot's hands flew across the controls, his face grim. "Something's interfering with our landing thrusters, and there's an energy field emanating from the listening post. It wasn't there during our preliminary scans." Through the viewport, Walker could see the consortium shuttle experiencing similar difficulties, its sleek form wobbling as it fought against invisible forces pulling it toward the surface. "Get us out of here," she ordered. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. Both shuttles crashed into Europa's icy surface, less than a kilometer from the listening post, sending plumes of frozen debris skyward. The impact wasn't catastrophic. The crafts remained largely intact, but it was clear that neither would be taking off again without significant repairs. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Chen watched in horror as telemetry data showed both shuttles going down. She immediately turned to Commander Taylor. "Deploy rescue teams." "Now." "Admiral," Rivera interrupted, his voice tense. "We're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures, far larger than anything we've seen before, and they're not consortium configurations." Chen's blood ran cold. "Show me." The tactical display shifted, revealing massive objects emerging from hyperspace throughout the Sol system. But instead of appearing at the system's edge as naval doctrine dictated, these vessels were materializing directly in Earth orbit, bypassing all outer defenses. "That's impossible," Taylor whispered. "Nothing that size can jump so precisely." Yet the evidence was undeniable. 7 enormous vessels, each easily dwarfing the largest consortium dreadnought, now hung in Earth's orbit like obsidian monoliths against the blue planet. "No known weapons powering up," Rivera reported, his voice shaking slightly. "But they're emitting the same energy signature as whatever's affecting our communications." Chen stared at the display, her mind racing. This wasn't a consortium attack, it was something else entirely. "Broadcast on all frequencies, all languages. Demand identification." Before the order could be carried out, every screen on the bridge flickered, then displayed the same image. A bipedal figure with features that seemed hauntingly familiar yet utterly alien. When it spoke, the voice seemed to bypass the ship's communication systems, resonating directly in the minds of everyone present. "Children of Earth, we have watched. We have waited. The experiment ends now." On Europa, President Walker dragged herself from the wreckage of her shuttle, helping her injured pilot through the emergency airlock. The shuttle's atmospheric containment had held, but the crash had damaged life support. They had perhaps an hour before the temperature would drop to lethal levels. Through her faceplate, Walker could see figures emerging from the consortium shuttle as well, 3 armored forms moving with surprising agility across the icy terrain. Not heading toward the listening post, but directly toward her position. "Madam President," her security officer wheezed, blood seeping from a gash in his forehead. "We need to reach the listening post. It's our only chance." Walker nodded, helping him to his feet. But as they took their first steps toward what they hoped would be sanctuary, the ice beneath them trembled. Cracks spread outward in a perfect circle, and the listening post itself seemed to shift, as though something beneath it was pushing upward. The dome structure split open like an eggshell, revealing not the abandoned facility they had expected, but a vast, pulsing technological complex that had been hidden beneath the ice for who knew how long. A brilliant beam of energy shot skyward from its center, cutting through Europa's thin atmosphere and stretching toward the stars. In the Consortium Council chamber, Ambassador Di Vero stared at the emergency broadcast with growing dread. The same mysterious message was playing on every channel, in every language, across the galaxy. "The experiment ends now." Thrax moved to his side, crystalline form vibrating with tension. "The Ancient Ones," the Medusan whispered. "The legends were true." Di Vero turned to his colleague. "What legends? What are you talking about?" "Before the Consortium, before any of our civilizations achieved spaceflight, there were stories, myths of those who came before, those who seeded the stars and watched from afar." Thrax's voice was barely audible. "Those who would one day return to judge their creation." On the bridge of his flagship, Grand Marshal Azoth roared in fury as his carefully orchestrated plan collapsed around him. The resonance field was supposed to disable their defenses, not summon, whatever these are. His second-in-command cowered before him. The field was calibrated exactly as the Vexstar scientists specified. They assured us nothing." Azoth snarled. "They used us. They used the humans. This was never about containment or negotiation." His 4 eyes narrowed as the terrible truth dawned on him. This was a summoning. President Walker stared at the towering structure emerging from beneath Europa's ice, its crystalline spires reaching toward Jupiter's distant form like accusing fingers. The 3 armored figures from the Consortium shuttle had stopped their advance, equally transfixed by the impossible sight before them. "Madam President," her security officer shouted, pointing skyward. Above them, the beam of energy that had shot from the facility began to expand, forming a translucent dome over the entire area. Where it touched the crashed shuttles, the damaged vessels seemed to shimmer and dissolve, their components reforming into something new, a bridge of sorts, connecting the human and consortium landing sites to the central structure. The lead consortium figure removed their helmet, revealing 4 eyes set in a diamond pattern. Grand Marshal Azoth himself. "Human," he called out, his translator crackling in the thin atmosphere. "This was not my doing." Walker's laugh was bitter. "A convenient claim when your trap fails." It was not his trap, came a new voice, one that seemed to bypass their comms entirely. A figure stood at the entrance to the newly formed bridge, its form humanoid yet wrong in subtle ways that made Walker's eyes hurt to focus on it. "It was mine, and you have all performed exactly as expected." Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Chen made a decision that would alter the course of human history. Target the unknown vessels. All batteries. Fire at will. The Retribution's weapons discharge, streams of plasma racing toward the nearest alien monolith. But instead of impacting against shields or hull, the energy simply vanished, absorbed without effect. "Admiral," Rivera reported, his voice strained, "the Consortium fleet is firing too." At the same targets. Indeed, the tactical display showed Consortium dreadnoughts launching their full arsenal against the mysterious vessels, with equally little effect. Former enemies united by a greater threat. "Incoming transmission," Taylor announced. It's from Ambassador Di Vero." The Tellarate's face appeared on screen, his normally composed features tense with urgency. "Admiral Chen, You must cease fire immediately. These are the progenitors, the beings that seeded life throughout the galaxy. Our weapons cannot harm them, but our aggression will inform their judgment. Their judgment, Chen demanded. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy was part of their experiment, testing different evolutionary paths, different social structures. Devereaux explained rapidly. They monitor, they observe, they occasionally adjust. But they only directly intervene when two species are on the verge of mutually assured destruction. Chen's blood ran cold. You knew about this. Not knew. Suspected. There are myths among the oldest consortium races, stories of watchers in the void. Devereaux's expression grew haunted. I never believed them until today. On Europa, President Walker and Grand Marshal Azov found themselves side by side, following their mysterious host into the heart of the ancient facility. The interior defied comprehension. Spaces that seemed larger inside than out, surfaces that shifted between solid and liquid states, and everywhere, displays showing scenes from across the galaxy. You created us, Walker said, finding her voice at last. All of us. Created? No. The being turned, its features shifting subtly until they appeared almost human, almost Kel-Sharon, almost something else entirely. We guided. We watched. We learned. Learned what? Azov demanded. Which forms of life could transcend their evolutionary programming? Which could overcome their instinct for destruction? The beam gestured, and a section of wall transformed into a display showing the Retribution and Consortium ships fighting side by side against the progenitor vessels. Interesting how quickly enemies become allies when faced with a common threat. Understanding dawned on Walker's face. This was a test. All of it, the century of oppression, the antimatter warheads, the negotiations. You were pushing us toward the brink to see what we would do. Not I. The being corrected. The Vexstar. For generations, they have served as our instruments, creating controlled conflicts to test emerging spacefaring species. Azov's massive form trembled with rage. My people have lost thousands in wars with humanity, wars engineered by the Vexstar on your behalf. The cost of evolution is always high, the being replied without emotion. But the results are illuminating. Walker stepped forward, anger overcoming her fear. You had no right to treat sentient beings as laboratory subjects. No right to orchestrate suffering on a galactic scale. Rights. The being seemed genuinely puzzled. We predate your concept of rights by billions of years. We are simply fulfilling our purpose, ensuring that those who inherit the stars are worthy of them. In orbit above Earth, the standoff continued. Human and consortium ships had ceased firing, but remained in defensive formation around their homeworlds. The progenitor vessels had made no hostile moves, but their mere presence was an implicit threat, unlike anything either civilization had faced. Then, without warning, the massive vessels began to move, not toward the planets, but into a precise geometric formation. Energy arced between them, forming a network of light that enveloped the entire inner system. What are they doing? Chen whispered. On her command display, a new transmission appeared, this one showing the interior of the Europa facility, where President Walker and Grand Marshal Azov stood before the alien being. Your trial is complete, the progenitor announced, addressing not just those before it, but seemingly all watching across the galaxy. Humanity and the consortium have demonstrated both great capacity for conflict and, when properly motivated, cooperation. An acceptable balance. The being turned to face Walker directly. You asked by what right we test you. Let me show you. With a gesture, the facility's walls became transparent, revealing not the icy surface of Europa, but a view of the galaxy unlike any human telescope had ever captured. Civilizations rose and fell in seconds, stars died and were born, and vast, dark shapes moved between them, hungry, patient, ancient. The universe is not empty, the progenitor said quietly, and not all that dwells in the darkness is benevolent. We prepare you because what comes next demands strength, unity, and sacrifice. Walker and Azoth exchanged glances, ancestral enemies suddenly united by a glimpse of something far worse than either had imagined. The resonance field, Walker realized suddenly. It wasn't just to disrupt our communications, it was a beacon. Indeed, the progenitor confirmed. The first signal to those who watch from beyond the galaxy's edge. Your war games are over. The real test begins now. In orbit, the progenitor vessels completed their formation. A pulse of energy spread outward, washing over every ship, every planet in the system. When it faded, the mysterious craft were gone, vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. But in their place, at the very edge of the solar system, where the heliosphere met interstellar space, a new signal appeared on every sensor array in both fleets. A massive distortion in space-time, growing larger by the second. Something was coming through, something vast, something ancient, and humanity, and the consortium would face it together, or not at all. 3 days after the departure of the progenitor vessels, the Europa facility had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Human and consortium scientists worked side by side, deciphering the ancient technology left behind. The structure itself seemed almost alive, reconfiguring its spaces to accommodate their needs, revealing information in measured doses, as if gauging their readiness. President Walker stood before a window overlooking Jupiter's swirling storms, Grand Marshal Azoth's massive form beside her. Their initial distrust had given way to a wary respect forged in shared existential crisis. My scientists estimate we have 8 months before whatever is coming reaches the edge of the Sol system, Azoth said, his voice rumbling in the chamber. Walker nodded. Ours say 6. Either way, it's not much time to prepare for something we barely understand. Understanding is luxury. Survival is necessity. Azoth turned to face her fully. The Consortium War Council will formalize our alliance within the week. Combined fleet exercises will begin immediately after. From across the room, Admiral Chen approached, accompanied by Ambassador Divero. The Admiral's expression was guarded, but determined. The data recovered from the facility confirms what we suspected, Chen reported. The progenitors have been staging these trials for millions of years. Species that fail are guided into extinction. Those that pass face the next test. And what exactly is this next test? Walker asked. Devero's expression was grim. The progenitors call them the harvesters. Ancient entities that move between galaxies, consuming advanced civilizations. They're drawn to technological progress, to the energy signatures of faster-than-light travel, to the ripples we create in space-time. The resonance field was a summons, Chen added. But the harvesters would have found us eventually. The progenitors merely controlled the timing. Walker's hands clenched. So they sacrificed us to save themselves. No, Divero replied softly. According to the facility's records, the progenitors have been fighting the harvesters for billions of years across thousands of galaxies. Each new spacefaring species is tested, prepared, and then enlisted in the war. Azoth made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. So we trade one conflict for another, larger one. But this time, we fight together, Walker said, her voice finding new resolve. And this time, we were warned. Back on Earth, the news of the alliance with the consortium had been met with shock, disbelief, and then a steely determination that surprised even the most cynical political observers. Factories that had been producing weapons to fight the consortium now retooled to create defenses against an enemy barely understood. Scientists who had spent careers developing technologies in secret now collaborated openly with their alien counterparts. In orbit, where the Retribution had once stood ready to fire upon consortium vessels, joint training exercises now took place. Human ships practiced maneuvers alongside former enemies, learning from each other's strengths, adapting to cover their weaknesses. In the United Earth Fleet headquarters, Commander Taylor studied the latest designs for the integrated defense system that would span the entire Sol system. It's not enough, he murmured. running simulations that consistently ended in defeat. Lieutenant Rivera looked up from his own work. It's not supposed to be. Not yet. Taylor frowned. What do you mean? The progenitors didn't choose us because we were ready. Rivera's eyes held a fierce light that Taylor had never seen before. They chose us because we have potential. Because when our backs are against the wall, humans don't give up. We adapt. We overcome. 6 months later, as the distortion at the system's edge grew large enough to be visible to Earth's most powerful telescopes, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned TSS Unity, a vessel twice the size of the Retribution, built with a combination of human innovation and consortium technology. Beside her stood a Kelshuran commander, once her enemy, now her ally. The Unity led a fleet of 500 ships, human and consortium vessels flying together under a joint command. Behind them, Earth and a dozen consortium worlds had been fortified with weapons platforms, planetary shields, and evacuation protocols should the worst come to pass. Signal from Europa base. Admiral Rivera announced from his familiar post at communications. The Harvester Vanguard has breached the heliopause. First contact in 15 minutes. Chen nodded, feeling the weight of history upon her shoulders. Send to all ships. Assume battle formations. This is what we prepared for. This is why we stand together. As the countdown to humanity's greatest challenge ticked away, she thought of her grandfather who had died in the First Contact War, of all those lost in the conflicts that followed. Their sacrifices had forged a species capable of facing this moment, of standing against the darkness that had haunted galaxies for eons. The stars ahead flickered as something moved against them, something vast, ancient, and hungry. But for the first time in its long journey between galaxies, the Harvester would not find easy prey waiting. It would find humanity, standing defiant, ready.